Good morning, Trumptopia. Are you awake yet, or are you still hitting the snooze button? Don't freak out. That was a trick question. Hello and namaste, my fellow transcendental, multidimensional, etherical beings trapped in ambulatory meat sacks. It is your favorite imaginary DJ and radio talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zebo. Today on Good Morning Trumptopia, a really fundamental question. Why is politics so fucking political? I know. That can sound like an absurdly meaningless question. We have been encouraged to accept and believe in the politicalness of politics. That is something we should question, dear friends and fellow humans. Why are we told by the leaders of all political parties that we must fight against the politics of all other political parties? In other words, why is politics contentious? Why is politics about creating conflict? Why is politics divisive? Today, I think we must, more than ever before, make the time, even as we continue to move forward through this chaos, juggling all of our stress and anxieties and concerns for the future, we must make the time at some point to question our fundamental attachments to the political system as we know it. That we really should question the form and the function of politics. Some would say, quite irrationally in my opinion, that that is some form of treason. And yet, usually the people throwing that word around also explicitly love the notion of overthrowing government, which is just a different term or phrasing for committing treason. So which is it, folks? Are you here to defend this country against treason, or are you here to commit treason to defend this country against politics? And why is it that everything in politics gets extremified to those levels? You gotta fight the evil socialists on the left because they're trying to take over your government. You gotta fight the evil pro-fascists and racists on the right because they're trying to take over our government. I mean, what that ultimately boils down to is Americans have to fight Americans over how to be an American. Oh, worse than that. I skipped a level where the system has got all Americans fighting against their fellow Americans over ideological constructs of how to be an American. Corrupt ideological constructs of how to be an American. And in my humble opinion, although I hesitate to make broad blanket statements, it seems to me, from my limited vantage point, that this is not unique to the United States of America. This is not a problem exclusive to the empire of Trumptopia. Sorry, the aspirational empire of Trumptopia, because it's not quite there yet. They're only 3.5 years in towards their groundwork preparation for installing it, and I think we're going to kick them a 4-year delay, maybe even an 8-year delay, because it's a pendulum that keeps swinging back and forth. And if you were to look at the motion of the pendulum over time, it's swinging back and forth and spiraling. If you don't believe me about pendulums, go visit the massive pendulum at Griffith Park, Griffith Observatory. If it's still open, I hope that they still have limited visitation access because it's a beautiful place. If you've never been there, it's on top of one of the beautiful hills in the Hollywood Hills area, not the same hill as Hollywood Sign, I don't think. And if it is, it's quite a bit far off. But the point is, on top of this beautiful hill, with this, abutting this precipice, this edge of the hill, where you have this gorgeous panoramic view of the LA basin, sits this beautiful kind of retro Americana, Spanish style, but also sort of very aspirationally new Art Deco-ish kind of building, in the middle of which, like almost interrupting the entry foyer, there is a massive pendulum. If you stand at the perimeter of the viewing portal and observe the pendulum and its motion from above for a long enough period of time, you will see that the pendulum is not only swinging back and forth, it is also creeping in a spirally creep fashion around the circle. Politics, dare I propose to you, dear friends, is engineered to operate in a very similar fashion. I've come to that conclusion after many decades of impartially observing politics and asking myself questions. Questions like, why is politics fixated, addicted to, based on the creation of wedge issues and the act of driving those wedge issues between groups of people who are theoretically friends and neighbors and fellow citizens of the same nation state. Indeed, why does politics create extremes, therefore producing extremists? That isn't some freaky fluke. That isn't some accident. That isn't some problem of a few bad apples here and there. I propose to you, dear friends, that it is an integral, although quite sublimated, quite hidden, designed form and function aspect of political ideology. It's not out loud on the surface, right? It's one of those things that up until recent times, politicians were quite crafty and clever of not speaking out loud about these issues, I think. But still also clearly propagating the indoctrination that led us here. We have been spoken to by our politicians as if political parties were warring tribes. The fuck is that, my friends? Stand up with me and ask, what the fuck is that? Because creating hate between neighbors, creating hate between community members, creating hate between citizens of the same place is a bullshit maneuver, is a moral immoval. It's immoral as a tactic. It is categorically manipulative. I ask these questions, and I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I certainly have certain inclinations towards possible responses and or conclusions and or solutions. And that is, my friends, the reason why I produce this podcast, to share with you those questions, let you ponder them, and then hopefully have a discussion about the various ways in which we could answer those questions. I tell you what, though, after 30 years of observing this political system, I am exhausted and I'm over it. I don't want to sit around in a cacophony of echo chamber manipulated political conflict anymore. I don't want to have to deal with acquaintances, friends, neighbors, social media, buddies, etc., that are at odds with one another because they are clinging desperately to one or another political ideology. And I do not think we need these things in our society. That's the opening to the show. Let's take a brief mental relaxation moment. Oh, darn it. I meant to read off the title of the opening track, and I swiped it off the list. So forgive me, I do not remember, but it was one of the many interesting remix tracks produced by the cartoon character DJ Zed. And I'm currently playing from a multi-volume album called Starting Over. This next track is called Drum Step 101, Jumping Through the Hoops. In my humble opinion, politics as we know it, as we tolerate it today, as it functions around us, as we inherited it from past generations, is deranged. And it is only one of many facets of society which seems to be, again, in my humble opinion, after observing it for 30 plus years, sociopathic in its function. Our society, collectively speaking, is, unfortunately, sociopathic. And like, it causes sociopathy. American politics in particular is quite redonkulous, in my humble opinion. There is this messaging of we're striving to make this country better. In the duopoly, which is the sort of primary center of the mainstream political madness, both parties use this tactic. Both parties quite literally stand in opposition to each other as mirror images of each other, each of them wearing the white hat for their base, claiming to be the good cop in the good cop versus bad cop scenario. This is something that members of each base of those parties has a hard time wanting to accept. Both, and I say this with love and concern and respect to everybody who might be triggered by this, but both parties manipulate their bases into blindly believing that their own base is righteous and true, their own party and party leadership are righteous and true exclusively, that all other political leaders are evil and false. All other political parties are evil and false, and therefore we must fight them. And as I think I've implied before, this is embedded not just in politics, but in religion. This religion is righteous, and all others are evil and sinful. But every single major organized religion makes that claim. If you've got 10 organizations, let's just make an imaginary theoretical. You encounter 10 different organizations, and they each provide the same product or service, and they each make the same claim of exclusivity regarding all the positive aspects or features of that product or service that would convince you to buy it. And they all denounce equally all the other organizations as being evil and corrupt and deserving of destruction. Now, they each produce roughly the same exact product or service, although in their own ways and with their own cultural diversification features, right? But basically speaking, same functional product/service. Flawed in its own ways from each of the 10 organizations. Now, I don't know about you, but if I encountered that and I looked at each of the 10 organizations and their claims and their product, I think I might ultimately conclude that either none of the products are worth participating in, or none of the products are worth acquiring or purchasing, or all of the products are so equally flawed that I'll use whichever product or service at whatever time, whichever is most convenient. Now, both of those positions are reasonable and can be defended. But both of those positions fail to solve the problem, and that is the flaws of the product/service and the false advertising coming from all 10 organizations. What then is the way to fix the problem, as opposed to either ignore the problem or simply be transactional and utilitarian about the problem? In my humble opinion, and I know I could be wrong, but I think it's a solid option that deserves investigation. In my humble opinion, healing those 10 different organizations is the solution. Not arguing about the products, not picking one arbitrarily and defending it against all others, and not radically ignoring them all either, because none of those options solve the problem. Healing the organization, improving the way the organization works, and therefore creating a better product, empowering each organization to produce a better product, maybe even a more diversified product, a more specific product, or a broader based product, a less specific product. There we approach the solution. But that begins by addressing the problems within that given organization and approaching each of the organizations equally with this approach of, I'm going to see what's wrong with your institution. And instead of coming at it with a batch recipe for all, based on my own political ideology, instead of picking one and trying to destroy the rest, I'm going to try to make each of them the best they can be. And I'm going to find out what is ailing the individuals who are in those organizations, because that's the root source of the flaws in the product. This came to me because I was hit with a really, really painfully obvious example of the deep institutional flaws with this confrontational political process that we tolerate, or that some of us love and admire and embrace and wrap ourselves up in. And that's that we approach any given problem with this confrontational, it's a wedge issue that's dividing us perspective. And in my humble opinion, I find it really challenging to solve any problem if I'm preoccupied with fighting against anybody and everybody that is also interested in solving the problem. You're going to have to forgive me if I think that that is sheer madness. Here's the example. And it's sort of localized to California, but if you really think about it and you sort of search the spectrum of political issues, you'll find that this comes up repeatedly in many ways about individuals, the way individual politicians are addressed, and also issues. But specifically here in my home state of California, there is a local proposition commonly referred to as Prop 25. For those of you who are not familiar, this proposition is addressing the political issue, the politicized issue, because it is in and of itself really more an issue of justice and compassion. But it has been politicized. The issue of money-based bail procedures, or just money bail. When people get arrested, and this is sort of a common thing, we're used to hearing this in, procedural cop drama TV shows, or, in movies about the law. A person gets arrested, they get arraigned, and then, if they're lucky, they get an opportunity to try and post bail, to get out of jail and not have to sit in jail while waiting for their day in court. The problem, as identified by concerned citizens who would like to see some sort of reform, is that poor people get stuck sitting in jail longer than rich people. And while at the surface that might easily be dismissed as, that's a poor people's problem, who gives a shit? There is a deeper issue there. It's not just a matter of inconvenience. It isn't just that poor people are poor. It's that the industrial jail complex profiteers on those that they keep in jail. And that means that the entire system is biased towards incarcerating poor people who will then be stuck in the system for longer periods of time, unable to do anything about it, like bail themselves out. And that's all independent of and before they get to their day in court to deal with the legal issue of the crime they've been accused of committing. And in this country, we are theoretically supposed to uphold and defend everyone as innocent until proven guilty. Suspect of course, but innocent until proven guilty. So that means that multitudes of innocent poor people who have yet to be proven guilty are burdened with the pain and the trauma and like inconvenience of the disruption of their life and their livelihood of having to stay in jail sometimes weeks, sometimes months at a time. Okay, I'm not expressing my opinion about that issue here. I'm trying to elucidate this example, and here's the example. That was just the issue. So that's an issue. Some people care, some people don't. Rich people are like, whatever, I've got lawyers and money. Poor people are like, we're poor. And poor people, here's a side issue. Poor people get berated with and bombarded with mental conditioning that indoctrinates them towards the self-delusion that they are indeed deserving of being criminalized. And I am of the humble opinion that no human being deserves to be criminalized unless they are genuinely criminals and committing actual crimes. Being poor is not a crime. But look around at the politics, and generally speaking, even on the left, which of course is, the side of the spectrum that pretends the hardest to be the most righteous and the most heroic, valiantly fighting for the rest of us against all the other evil people that are our friends and neighbors. So zooming back away from the problem, that's the problem. I've spelled it out and I've rambled about it. So it's an issue, right? And well-intentioned people who think that it is unfair for a wealthy person who's committed a really horrible crime to be able to walk away from 2.5 months in jail before their court date, while poor people who've committed often much lesser crimes have to sit in jail and be profiteered on, because that cannot be ignored. They're not taking that individual prisoner's money, although they are. They fucking nickel and dime you when you're in jail. Trust me, I know from personal experience. And that's a whole nother episode. I'm not a felon. Fuck off. But I once did get hauled in, twice rather, get hauled in for a DUI, and I don't drink like that anymore. And that's a whole nother episode, which I think I've already addressed a little bit. But back to this issue. Don't judge me. You don't know me. Back to the actual issue at hand. Here's my concern. I'm less concerned with the fact that people want to reform money bail. I agree with that. As someone, here's the reason why I brought up my shady past. As someone who could not bail themselves out of a situation where I technically should not have been incarcerated. And that's a whole long, complicated situation. Just take that for what it's worth right now. It sucks. Just trust me on this. It sucks to be stuck in jail, unable to bail yourself out, and basically live at the mercy of the industrial prison complex, which does not want to help you. It does not even want to reform you anymore. That used to be the primary focus, but less and less these days, it would appear. There are plenty of good people, by the way, in the system. I never think of any group or individual or system as an absolute block of good or evil. And I've talked about that at length before, and I'm sure we'll come back full circle on it. Here's the issue I'm trying to point out. Sitting here as a political observer in California, I have been bombarded by a series of commercials, half of which are for the proposition that wants to radically change the money bail system in California, and the other half of which are against that proposition and want everybody in California to vote no. Now that's typical, right? That's what happens when you set up a duopoly that's conflict-oriented. If the people, like as in we the people, want to fix a problem, we then create a wedge issue, divide each other about it, and fight. over and over and over again. And it's reached a really ridiculous, almost absurd level. The pro commercials, the commercials that are pro Prop 25 and the commercials that are anti Prop 25 often play back to back. So in the same commercial break, you'll get this aspirational message that's really emotional and is about how unfair it is that this rich guy that did a horrible thing, and this is, I'm sort of paraphrasing the main argument. The pro proposition commercial, there's variants, but it's got the same basic imagery in the different variations. Or maybe it's all the same one and I've interpreted it slightly differently at different times, but the primary thrust is they show you an example. Here's a rich white guy that did a really horrible thing. Here's a poor black man that did a really little thing that's technically illegal. I think one was a rapist. Yes, I believe in one example they have a white male in their mid-20s. I said old earlier, I was incorrect. Who committed rape or is accused of committed rape. Because he was wealthy, he was able to pay the rather large bail that was imposed on him, and he did not have to sit in jail for weeks and or months before going to court. Some would say, who cares? If he's guilty, he's going to court. I mean, he's going to jail. And, the problem solved. But there's a bunch of flaws with that logic. But let's come back to the commercial. So they juxtapose this white fella who committed rape with an older black gentleman who was accused of and arrested for supposedly stealing a $5 bill. They don't tell you more about either side. They just tell you that. You don't know if the rapist was a really good guy and something bad happened and the situation is murky. And you don't know if the gentleman who's supposedly stole $5 has a totally clean criminal past or not, right? And they do that so that you fill in with your own biases. But this commercial is clearly designed to manipulate anyone with a little bit of sympathy or empathy for others to side with the poor, right? Evil rich people get to walk free and all the rest of us have to spend miserable time in jail, which, by the way, can be indeed a dangerous place. And that's a whole nother issue and a whole nother episode. Put a pin in that. The problems of the industrial prison complex and how it is run today. So you watch that commercial, and if you've got even a little tiny bitter heart, you're like, oh, what a bummer. And it's unimaginable. Why would someone rich who's done something horrible get better treatment than someone poor who's not done, who's done something way less horrible? So you are inclined, the goal is to get you to go, oh, well, this is a terrible system. We need to get rid of it. And the commercial appears really empathetic and sympathetic towards minorities, people of color, people from disadvantaged neighborhoods, as it were. And then you get hit with the anti-Prop 25 commercial. The pro-Prop 25 commercial comes from, everyone, how political commercials have to disclose who's responsible for the content. There's a pro-Prop 25 group I don't recognize and or remember the name right now, so they don't seem to be, they aren't an institution or an organization that has a long-standing record that I'm aware of. And if they are, I apologize. It's just one I'm not familiar with. It's not really that important. My point is, I was surprised and a little confused the first time I saw the anti-Prop 25 commercial. Because it comes very boldly from the NAACP. And that is a pro bono legal institution that stands up for the human rights of disadvantaged, underprivileged minorities, right? Now, setting aside all opinions, whether you support or disagree with the NAACP, they usually are advocating for some form of justice reform. If there's a justice reform bill on the table, they usually tend to side for it. Now, for some reason, and I don't know the reasons, they are against Prop 25. Now, they explain their rationale, but I don't know the real causality, right? That's what I'm trying to clarify. The commercial against Prop 25 is presented really clearly. The alternative solution, the new thing that this proposition would usher in, they feel might be even more biased against minorities, people of color, and underprivileged communities. And at first that's a challenging thing, right? Because now what is the proposed solution? And I haven't gone and read the full documentation on it because I haven't had time. And it's the theme that I want to address, not the actual issue of money bail. I can come back to that and do another episode later on. Maybe. Because I need to familiarize myself more fully. I don't know all the technical details, but here's the surface level understanding that I have. And I just beg your forgiveness for it being no deeper than that. But on the surface, like your average voter, because let's be frank, let's be really honest, let's put a pause for a hot second. How many of all y'all out there in the electorate have the time to truly, deeply, and fully register and comprehend everything on the ticket? You don't, do you? So you do your best, you dig into the ones you know the least about, and you sort of make your guesses about the ones you think you know the most about, and you hope for the best. Or you vote party, and you don't care, and you just vote all red or all blue. So the proposed replacement solution is a technological one. And there, of course, we have a whole murky field, right? Like technology. People are split. Some people love it and think it is the glorious hope for the future. Some people are so extreme about it that they want to replace their own bodies with machines, right? Like there's a legitimate movement for transhumanism that is inspired by sci-fi and anime and all that kind of stuff. Robotics is a fascinating subject. And as a robot from the future, I have a lot to say about it. But you'll have to put a pin in that. We'll have to come back to that for another episode and or chapters in one of my works of literary sci-fi fiction. So tune into that. For those of you curious, you can find samples of my work posted on Wattpad.com. It's a safe and totally free community for amateur writers and those who love to support and help discover amateur writers. So if you like knowing, I read that book before it got picked up by Barnes & Noble or whatever the fuck, whoever would pick up a book and make it famous, go to Wattpad. Because while there's a lot of crazy junk out there, just like there is on any social media platform, there's a lot of nonsense, there's some really great work being produced. And of course, I humbly invite you to also swing by my little corner of that world and visit my work. You can find it by going to www.wattpad.com/Mr. Zeppo, I do believe. At any rate, I digress. Algorithms. Artificial intelligence algorithms. Similar, I would imagine, and this is speculative, I don't know for sure, but similar to the kinds of magical black boxes that the whiz kid gurus of technology and finance have been using on the stock market for some years now, is what they want to bring in. They want to bring in these algorithmically driven AI programs that you feed all of the criminal records into, and based on the mysterious magic of algorithmic AI decision making, it will spit out who gets to be released from jail, supposedly based on risk factors and the flight, the risk of flight and all that, whether or not they would be a danger to their community, whether or not they might run away, etc. I don't know how a computer determines that. I don't know how a person determines that about a given individual who's in trouble with the law, arrested, in prison, and going to court. I don't know. I think that's why we said way back in the day, whenever we invented the money bail system, let's just make it about money and create an industry around it. Obviously, whenever you base a transaction on money and create an industry around it, corruption goes, ooh, a new playground to play in. And it creeps in and corrupts and hijacks people and organizations. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm saying this is something that happens in our universe, and we must be aware of it. Okay, so back to the two commercials. Imagine you live in California, if you don't, and you're just an average run-of-the-mill member of the voting electorate. I don't care which party, because I sort of want everyone to wake up that all parties are sort of bunk and that we need a different system. But that's a whole nother sidebar. And you see, let's imagine that you are a voter in California and you see these two commercials back to back. How do you decide? You have to go do deeper research, right? You got to find out if if the argument that the current system is corrupt and unfair is true, which I personally think it is. Then you got to go check to see if the NAACP's commercial and their claims that these AI algorithm programs that would determine who gets to sit in jail for 3 months or more and who gets to go home and wait for their court date, whether or not they are corrupt or biased or, there's a bunch of ways that an AI decision-making system could be flawed. But then what? Both of those things can be true, right? The money bail system can be fucked up, unfair, corrupt as all hell, and this supposedly new solution can also be so potentially flawed and open to the same kind of corruption just in different ways that it is equally undesirable. So the big questions that run through my mind, that have been running through my mind since encountering this dilemma for myself during a commercial break while watching, I think this happened to me while watching the vice presidential debate. The first question that comes to mind is, does either commercial really do justice to the real nature of the problem and the real value of the proposed replacement process? And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know that I would have time to really find out for sure. The best I can do is sort of like a surface search and get other people's opinions about it. Other journalists are writing about it. Other commentators who comment on political procedures are probably opining about it. People like me are probably opining about it. But how does that help me decide? Now, we got to put a big reminder red pin on the corkboard. Little tiny secret sidebar. It's a little behind the scenes. Every time I say that, I literally imagine a corkboard floating off to my right and a little bit up, like at a 45-degree angle. And I literally reach down and imagine picking up a red pin and putting it on the board, just so you know. But we need to put a pin up there now about the really thorny squishy? That's not a word. The really thorny and controversial question of how the bloody fuck do we actually choose things anyways? Like, how do you as a human being come to a decision? Do you really understand that? Or do you only have a narrative that you tell yourself that you think you understand how you make decisions? That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother episode, because there's theories that contradict each other that would lead you to think, of course, I completely control the choices I make. And conversely, wow, if you really think about it, there's no way that I control the choices I make. I just make them, and I cannot understand how. Sort of like we really can't understand how thinky thoughts that we didn't plan for happening happen. Where do inspired ideas or random concepts or words that just come tumbling out of our mouth originate. Who knows? But we'll put a pin on the board because that's a whole episode worth having. So back to this concern. Which way do you vote? How do you choose which way do you vote? And why the fuck is our system set up so that those who want to, both sides want change. The NAACP isn't in favor of money bail system, as far as I know, because I think they would recognize the inherent systemic, racially dividing, financially dividing issues involved. So they're not like just against it to be against it. They must have their deep concerns about the technology that would be involved, right? So that's valid. Like, their concern is valid. And so is the concern about the financial and racial injustice involved in the system that exists now. So we have this polemic, this apparently true dichotomy, which in my opinion is a false dichotomy, and those two different kinds of dichotomies should not be confused. So, very much like voting for who should be president next, I am stuck in a position that is neither for or against the given proposition. Because while I understand both arguments, and I see their point, I do not think that voting on this particular proposition is going to fix the real problem. If I vote yes, I'm taking a huge risk. What if the opposing concern is really, really valid? So now we've got a whole new problem we've created. And we're going to have to wait another 4 years before we figure it out, build consciousness around it, protest it, and put another ballot up? And that's if we're lucky. And we hustle, right? It might take another 8 years. How long has the money bail system been around? Question that. How long have people been protesting it? How long have people been wanting and trying to organize a movement to reform it? More than 4 or 8 years, I assure you. So, we haven't solved the problem, right? This symbolizes, in my opinion, the very central pillar of how politics is designed to work, is meant to function, the way we know it now. Is there a different understanding of politics that exists? There are many. Is there sort of this illusion that politics is actually meant to be working a different way? Yes, there is. Do we often play the blame game about why politics is functioning the way it is? Oh boy, do we? Exclamation point. Is that game of arguing and pointing fingers about why politics is failing to live up to its proposed potential systemic and by design? I humbly submit to you that question for your consideration, dear friends. question emerges. What do we do about this? Do we keep voting for the lesser of two evils? Do we burn the whole system down? Do we organize some organized murder to solve it? No, dear friends, I don't think any of those approaches will do the job. But isn't it interesting that those are the kind of most popular options being bantied about by people? Let's have a civil war. Let's tear the whole system down and watch it burn. Let's just keep voting for the lesser of two evils and arguing about who's the most evil. That, dear friends, is, in my humble opinion, exactly what the system wants us to be doing. The system wants us to be caught up in the ego trap of thinking we are better than everybody else. The system wants us caught up in tribalistic us versus them, judgmental, ego-driven thinking. The system wants to drive more and more wedge issues down our throats so that we turn around and vomit hate at each other. The system wants us constantly exhausted on this treadmill of failing to truly solve the problems that are killing us. The system wants us fighting each other. Why? Because when we do those things, we are categorically unable to create consensus, to see each other clearly, and to collaborate for the benefit of all. So, to come full circle about the question, why is politics so political? Because they profit on it, in my humble opinion. Now, did I prove that in this episode? Of course not. I asked you the questions to get you thinking, and I shared some of my thoughts about it. And now I'll leave you with my conclusion for this episode here and wrap things up. And then I will humbly invite you to deeply think about it, and then come on down to any of my social media pages. For sure, I welcome you on any of them. I'm primarily on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, this show lives on its originating platform, Sprecher.com. And you are welcome and invited to come on out, share your thoughts, reactions, questions, and proposed answers to any of the questions I throw out there so that we can talk about them further and they can be featured in future episodes. So here's my my final thoughts for today. I've struggled with these questions for a really long time. When I was young, much younger than I am now, and I first arrived here, I sort of ignored politics for a bit, like most people do for a while in their early life, because it sort of doesn't even exist, right? As children, politics is so abstract and it's such an adult topic. It's such a thing that adults do that we tend not to think very much about it until politics encroaches and intrudes into our lives and our awareness. For some of us, that happens really young. For some of us, that almost hardly happens at all, even though we get indoctrinated into a political system and become participating members in a political party. It never really dawns on us to question it. We just start dancing along with everybody else. And that's not something to be really hard on yourself about. That's how we operate. As ambulatory talking meat sacks, we rely on each other to performatively display the examples of behavior which we then populate in our own life. That's human nature. Now, that's not the entirety of human nature. It's just sort of one of the fundamentals. So, at a very early age, politics intruded in my life, and I became aware of it and started observing it. At first, as an enthusiastic supporter of the first political group that I encountered, which, curiously, was the Republican Party. I came into my own political consciousness while Ronald Reagan was in office. Now, some people out there might listen to that statement and then do a cursory look at my profile, as it were, and go, that's impossible. You couldn't have been savvy enough. I beg to differ, but I sure as fuck am not bullshitting you. I started paying attention to and listening with deep curiosity to Ronald Reagan and his political speeches and trying to understand what was going on and why this former television and film actor who used to sell coffee and cigarettes to America was celebrated and lauded and almost worshipped by so many and vilified, objected to, and disagreed with by so many others on the other side. It quickly became apparent that there was this paradox, this us versus them, right versus left. And so, out of curiosity, I was like, well, while I was enamored and appreciated the eloquence of Ronald Reagan and sort of fell into Republicanism as my first political culture, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went, well, what are the Democrats about? I realized I had no idea. So I went and tried to investigate that while he was still in office, and then, of course, as we moved forward from that. And I went back and forth over the years, and I eventually sort of realized that this paradox exists, this counterbalance, counterculture, us versus them, tribalistic thinking is seemingly baked into the cake. And that's a funny phrase. And to the best of my understanding, it basically means that it is so ubiquitous that it is taken for granted and considered an ingredient of the cake. Now, you can bake shit into a cake, friends. You can bake all kinds of random garbage into a cake. Does that mean it is an intended and beneficial ingredient? Well, the entirety of my time here, stuck on this planet, observing humanity and observing culture and politics, I have found that there's a lot of crazy bullshit that's baked into the cake. And it's a multi-layered cake, yo. Now, some people want to take the cake and flush it. Some people want to take the cake and flip it upside down and just beat it up and mash it up. Some people want to eat the cake and divide it up according to who deserves which layer of garbage baked into the cake. And I think my eating the cake analogy is beginning to fail, but let me get back to my main through line. There's a lot of things there are many multiple differing things baked into this cake we call American politics. And it is my humble opinion that what we need to do is indeed bake a new cake with all new ingredients that is healthier for everyone. Do we need to burn the previous cake down in a raging hellfire of destroying everything? Of course not. We can just let the old cake slide off the plate. We can compost the old plate. The old cake, rather. Here we go. Trying to find the right extension of my own analogy is difficult when it's happening live on the air, so you'll forgive me if it's a little wonky. But what if we took the original cake, really thought about it deeply after having set aside all of our addictions, our biases, our ideological boundaries, and just really thought about the cake in terms of which ingredients are healthy, which ingredients are not healthy, and which ingredients are totally toxic and completely unnecessary. Because of all the ingredients involved in our political system as it exists and operates now, I assure you there are at least those three categories going on. There are aspects to our political system as it exists now that might actually be good and healthy if separated out from all the other shit and implemented in a healthier context. There are sort of meaninglessly unnecessary ingredients to our political system as it operates, and there are severely deadly toxic junk ingredients. And the really weird part is that those who are the most adamant about fighting in favor of their own political party and against others tend to be really addicted to those most toxic ingredients, in my humble opinion. But I think that we can sort of take a moment collectively, analyze the cake and its ingredients, compost the existing cake in order to grow new, fresh, healthy ingredients from which to bake a new cake. Instead of lighting the entire banquet hall on fire and letting the cake and the building it is in burn to the ground. Or instead of having a deadly dangerous cake food fight where we literally try to kill each other with the cake. That is the end of my awkward cake analogy. I don't want anyone to just blindly agree with me. But I also stand by my assertions with a high level of confidence. I am totally willing to listen to someone who's capable of calmly, intelligently describing to me their thoughts on why I might be wrong. But I propose to you, dear friends, that fighting about the questions I've just discussed will not bring about a solution. Thinking about those questions and then setting everything down, forgiving ourselves and each other about all of it, focusing on a little bit of internal, personal, spiritual, mental, and physical healing first, and then on group collective healing, which I argue is actually possible and not some sort of magical thinking, fantasy, utopian distraction. I think we can then move forward with transforming the system, healing the system from within, instead of falling into and giving into becoming victims of the system and the ego traps it uses against us. That civil war that people on all sides, that some people, not everybody, obviously, but that some of the fringy, more extreme people on all sides, in all directions, are foaming at the mouth for, is not a solution to anything. In my humble opinion, it is a nefarious ego trap. The system wants your violence. The system wants the left to literally fight the right, and the right to literally fight the left, and the third parties to literally fight everybody else and each other on the streets with guns. And the scary part is a lot of people think that that's the right way to do it. A lot of people think that that's what it means to be a patriot. And I humbly beg y'all to consider that maybe that's a load of political horseshit designed to keep everyone on a treadmill of distraction, and hopefully, in their eyes, those who are implementing these political tools, graduate us from just a treadmill of distractions to a merry-go-round meat grinder of butchering each other. I mean, if the system of oppression profiteers on international warfare, what absurd reason do they have to not profiteer on internal conflict on the streets of any given nation? Now, does this next election have the potential to fix everything? Not really. Will this next election put a stop to Donald Trump's current episode in the mini-series of American politics? Yes. And is that worth pursuing? Absolutely. 4 more years of this will be bullshit. Forgive me, dear Trump fans, if you're out there and you're listening to this show. I've talked at great length already about why I believe Trump is not only just another politician, but is overtly manipulating his base for precisely the reasons I've talked about today. But I've been rambling long enough on this Saturday. As always, dear friends and listeners, I humbly thank you for tuning in and listening to my unorthodox, unscripted, often rough around the edges, radio talk show style podcast show. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. And may we find ourselves in a place better positioned to initiate all that healing really soon. Stay tuned for more shows dropping in the immediate future. And come on down and share your thoughts with me on any of the platforms that this show has profiles on.